Yo, what's good everyone? I'm Spooky Schmack, and with the recent reveal of the gameplay trailer, there has been an interview with Miyazaki about the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC, and so I'm just gonna go through this interview and kind of like say everything that they're saying to each other verbatim, and kind of go through and just kind of like talk about what's going on. So yeah, let's get into it because I'm fucking stoked for this DLC. This is the reason that I started streaming. It's the reason that I've started creating content in general for like platforms like TikTok and Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, whatever. You know what I mean? Like Elden Ring has been it is officially my favorite game of all time. I love playing this game and I cannot wait to get through this. So let's just jump right into it. So this article is exclusive. Elden Ring director answers all of our Shadow of the Erdtree DLC questions. I'm gonna kind of skip some of the foreplay there. And we're just gonna get right into the interview. So the interviewer asks, can you set the stage for us with Shadow of the Erdtree? Where is it taking place? And can you speak kind of generally regarding what the story is going to be about? And Miyazaki says, first of all, the setting of Shadow of the Erdtree is a brand new land. It's a brand new separate map from the lands between. It is a land that is overshadowed by the particular Shadow of the Erdtree, as opposed to the Erdtree in the lands between. And it takes place again on an entirely separate, physically separate map. So it will involve a warp of sorts to get there. In terms of setting and themes, it technically occupies the same space as the lands between, the same universe, but due to something story related that we won't reveal today, this has become physically disconnected, and you'll travel to the Shadow of the Erdtree land as a separate place. So this land of Shadow itself is a place the player will visit to walk in the steps of Miquella. Miquella is a key part of this story this time, perhaps as guessed by many players who saw the art that was released previously. That is in fact Miquella, and it is he who traveled to the land of the Shadow, and it's the players who will be tracing his path and following in his footsteps, trying to see what he's going to do there. Another axis of the story is Queen Marika and what she did in the land of the Shadow, and what led Miquella to follow her there. So at the end of the trailer, there was a very brief scene where you see what I thought initially was Miquella, but I'm guessing now that's actually Queen Marika. I'll play a little video, but okay, let's just continue. So the interviewer asks, speaking of this new land that we're traveling to, how is it structured? Is it structured in very much the same way as the lands between, where there are legacy dungeons and minor dungeons? Can you describe a little bit about how the world is going to be compared to the base game? And Miyazaki says, yes, we think the players can expect a similar experience to what they had with the base game. This is going to be structured in a similar way, as you said, with open field maps, with large-scale legacy dungeons, and with small to medium-scale legacies as well. So we hope players will enjoy this same sense of scale and sense of adventure throughout that structure. And the interviewer asks, can you approximate the size of the world compared to the world in the base game? And Miyazaki said, it's hard to answer without giving away too much and to a high degree of accuracy, but if you think in terms of scale or size, it's probably comparable, if not larger, than the area of Limgrave from the base game. And so the interviewer asks, so you mentioned Miquella earlier, and that's a character that I know fans have had a lot of questions about. Is there anything specifically you can tell us about the role this character will play in the DLC? And I know the trailer opens with a shot of Mohg's boss arena, with the hand hanging out of the cocoon. Will we learn about what Mohg did to him? And Miyazaki says yes. The cocoon and arm you saw at the beginning of the trailer, this is actually the point of entry to the Land of Shadow where the players will enter to the DLC area. And this does have some relation to Miquella. And Miquella has, as we said, traveled to the Land of Shadow. He does have some motive and some objective there, which we don't want to give away too much. But essentially the player will be following in those footsteps in the same way they followed the blessings from the grace, the sites of grace in the lands between. They'll be following in Miquella's footsteps, and these will guide them through the Land of the Shadow and reveal that motivation to them. And of course, the player is not the only one who is curious about Miquella. There are several characters in the world and NPCs who have been following Miquella as well. and the player will encounter them on their journey in the land of the shadow, and they will make new friends and enemies, we hope. The interviewer asks, there were a lot of striking bosses and enemies that were revealed in this trailer, and I was wondering if we could just go through a handful of them one by one, and you can either explain who or what they are, tell us an anecdote about their design, or anything you want. And I'm going to do my best to describe them because I don't know the names of them. First off, there's like a giant basket of flaming kindling. And Miyazaki says, okay, so this giant basket of flame, as you so eloquently put it, Mitchell, was a terrible weapon you used in a war that occurred in the land of shadow, basically. So again, without saying too much, we can't give away the name just yet officially, but yes, it was a really gruesome weapon that was used, and the kindling that you see is actually the remains of bodies that were put in there to burn. So there's a friendly fellow. And then the interviewer says, and then there's an absolutely terrifying worm with arms that eats people whole. And Miyazaki said, it's hard to talk about some of these enemies without spoiling anything, hopefully you understand. But there's a significant connection between these enemies, the way they are in the land of the shadow. And the interviewer says, okay, I'm just going to skip to the last one if it's okay. But what can you tell me about the man in red with the snakes and flames that's kind of like a focal point of this DLC trailer? And Miyazaki says, yes, we can speak to this character a little bit. This is as you say, a key figure of this DLC. We believe he will be officially revealed to be Mesmer by the time the trailer goes live. And yes, he's a key figure in the DLC, and he again has this important element of shadow to him, which is a key theme throughout the DLC as well. And you may have seen at the end of the trailer, there was this piece of key art where it shows Mesmer sat in his throne-like chair, and people who've played the game may recognize this throne to be one of those from the final boss room where you battle Morgoth. And this represents the thrones at the base of the Erd Tree, and it's supposed to symbolize that Mesmer stands on equal footing to these other demigods and children of Marika who sat around in these thrones or held the rooms of the Erd Tree. So he's an important figure who rivals these other demigods, and as you play the DLC, you will learn a little about why he wasn't featured in the Legends of the Erd Tree, the Lands Between. You'll realize why he exists in this shadow, this land of shadow. And so the interviewer goes on to ask, switching gears for a second, one of the big news points I think of Elden Ring was that the scenario was written by George R.R. Martin. Did he have any kind of role in the planning of the Shadow of the Erd Tree? And if so, just out of curiosity, have you talked to him since the game has come out, and has he had any kind of reaction to the outstanding success of the game? And Miyazaki says, the way George R.R. Martin's story has been incorporated is the same as it was with the base game with Elden Ring. And to avoid misunderstanding there, we just want to point out that he hasn't written anything exclusively and new for the sake of the DLC. But it would still be fair to say that he and his mythos that he created for us are involved in the creation of Shadow of the Erd Tree in the same way. And the reason for that is that in making the base game and making Elden Ring, we took from that mythos, but we only took one part of it. We took from a part that created the story of Elden Ring and created the world that we wanted to envision, and the Shadow of the Erd Tree is yet another part of that original mythos, and that he wrote and has inspired us to create the story of this DLC. As for your second question, Mr. Martin and I have at least exchanged emails since the release of Elden Ring, but unfortunately, we haven't been able to meet and speak in person. It's something I've wanted to do since the release and to talk to him again and share in our joy for the game, hopefully. But unfortunately, he's just been so busy that we haven't had a chance yet, but I'll keep looking for an opportunity. And the interviewer says, it's been 2 years now since Elden Ring has launched, and much of the hardcore audience have already found the best gear, they've fought the hardest bosses, and they're at such high levels that I imagine it must be difficult to come up with content that can provide a challenge for those hardcore fans without making it too hard for some of the more casual Elden Ring players. So with all of that said, how do you approach difficulty with a DLC such as this? And Miyazaki says, our general approach to difficulty has, of course, not changed to Elden Ring. We want to create a challenging experience that tests the players and gives them a feeling of satisfaction and accomplishment when they get through these struggles. However, we do want to stress that there's still a freedom of approach and a breadth of strategy to these encounters. And that means both how you approach them if you want to face these challenges, or come back to them later and circumvent them and find another way around, and come back when you're ready. This same philosophy is taken in Shadow of the Erdtree, and again, to our more hardcore players, they will find optional bosses who have been tuned in a similar way to the likes of Millennia, who I'm sure you remember from the base game, who are not crucial. And the interviewer says, oh god. Miyazaki says, yeah, you might remember her. They're not crucial to the completion of the DLC, but they are an optional extra to help challenge for those who are so inclined. That said, there may not be another boss on exactly the same level as Millennia, but we feel like this is somewhere that we've paid close attention to, this level of challenge and offering that same level of freedom. And we hope that players are able to blossom in the Land of Shadow in the same way they were able to in the Lands Between. Actually, I want to redress that. It's not the fact that it's only a lesser level to Millennia, but we have prepared bosses on that with that similar mindset within the DLC area. Ones that will challenge the player and hopefully be as memorable as Millennia was. And the interviewer goes on to ask, final question on the topic of Shadow of the Erdtree, but do you envision this as the end of Elden Ring's story, or is there room for either more DLC or an Elden Ring 2 down the line? And Miyazaki says, we don't want to say this is the end of the Elden Ring saga for now. I think we said a similar thing at the end of Dark Souls 3. We didn't want to flatten those possibilities or put a pin in them just at the time. And it's a similar story with Elden Ring. We don't want to discourage the possibilities for that. There might be more ideas in the future. We don't have any current plans to make a second DLC or sequel, but we definitely don't want to snuff out that possibility. We think that there could well be something in the future. And then this last question doesn't necessarily pertain to Shadow of the Erdtree, but it can give us a little bit of insight into, what the studio is going through right now. As a lot of us know, FromSoft recently acquired the rights to Elden Ring, so this is just some good information to understand about how future titles can be coming from FromSoft. And the interviewer says, and lastly, the state of the game industry right now is pretty rough. There's lots of layoffs, studio closures, the PS5 apparently is already in the latter stage of its life cycle. Has the landscape of the industry changed your outlook at all on From Software's future? And Miyazaki says, yes. I'm aware of the situation in the games industry it's going through right now is quite harrowing. I think in terms of speaking to all those things that are happening, like layoffs and closures at other studios, I think it's difficult for me to understand the exact circumstances there. I won't speak to those specifics. Just speaking on behalf of From Software, I think we are very blessed in the way that we have a lot of keen and up-and-coming developers who've grown, and they've developed within the studio, and they've reached these director positions where they're able to direct projects such as the recent Armored Core game. We have several of these up-and-coming directors who were able to delegate these projects to, and were able to have multiple projects on the go at once. What I foresee in this climate, at least for us, is a From Software where games can be directed by others, not only myself. I think in the face of that struggle, and the place where the games industry is right now, I do see this as a time for us to continue to grow, and continue to cultivate this talent, and continue to release these games for as long as we can. So there you have it, guys. That's the interview with Miyazaki about, the Shadow of the Erdtree, and it confirms a lot of the information that we've been so speculative about for a long time. I'm super excited for this DLC. Go and watch the trailer if you haven't already. There's going to be little clips throughout the video. But yeah. Thank you so much for watching. Follow, like, subscribe. I will be doing all kinds of live streams, posting all kinds of content, and just new videos centered around builds and kind of build planning for, the DLC. So yeah. Drop a follow, subscribe, check me out on TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, everywhere else. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys later.